Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. I want to thank my sponsors, Top Spinini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins & Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. So here's an episode for your listening enjoyment. Welcome, Reagan Jobe, longtime friend, certainly friends with your dad. I was looking forward to this. We've been talking about this, but when I got a box of Premier Hockey from Upper Deck last week, I thought it's now definitely the time to talk to Reagan, because I think you're part of the OPC Premier origin story for me from back in early 91 when OPC Premier came out. And this is just Upper Deck Premier. Upper Deck owns the OPC license. But Premier was a brand established in early 91, first, I think, with the hockey. And it was the rage and the movement toward more premium kinds of sets. And premium just means it's better. Premier means first. And if it's the premiere, that's like the first showing of a movie or something like that. So premier definitely means quality. The whole industry was trying to figure out how do we get to quality. Upper Deck had led the way with their landmark set in 89. The hockey magazine had just come out, but baseball was going strong. It was mainly baseball still, but basketball, football, and then hockey came out right before that. And it was hot. So January of 91, I get an email from your dad saying he was in charge of education for a family university that was going to be up in Vancouver. And would I be willing to go up there and give a few talks and interact with, I'm guessing, about 300 families that were there in Vancouver. And you guys were one of them. My question to you first is, were you the impetus for me being invited to that lovely event where I got to be friends with your dad and met a lot of other lifelong friends?
I don't know that I was the impetus for it, but I was definitely influencing getting him to pay attention to cards and asking a whole lot of questions.
Well, one of the things he told me, he said this would be a group because of some level of affluence, that the kids of the members of the families, especially of a certain age, were undoubtedly big time into collecting. Now, my problem was when I got there, I realized there's all these parents around and they don't care that much, but there were a bunch of kids, of which you were one, because I think you were 10-ish or something.
Yeah, about that.
These kids were so into it and the parents didn't really understand. So my first talk, I thought I'm going to walk in and be a bunch of dads there. There were no dads there. There were only a few moms there, but there were a bunch of kids. So my prepared remarks went out the window because they didn't care about the business aspect. They just wanted to know about cards. And your dad helped me pivot, maybe with your encouragement, to my second talk or my third talk. I thought that's not the best format. So we were able to rent like a passenger van and do a tour of the Vancouver card shops, of which there were a whole bunch at the time. That was super fun for me. Was it good for you too?
Yes, it was a lot of fun.
It was very informal. We went into the shops as a group. But again, I think the baseball OPC Premier was what was hot then in late summer, like August.
Yeah.
What's your recollection of that? Because that was just a fabulous experience for me.
It was a lot of fun. I remember having been a kid in Dallas growing up, there was the one shop that I had been to every time I ever wanted cards. And so we would just go to the local shop. I'm sure there were more card shops in Dallas, but being 10 years old, Mom would take me to the closest one to the house, and that would be it. I remember when we went up and you were going to speak, and you were very correct. I remember it very well. My dad was like, oh yeah, he's going to speak. And I was like, oh, can we ask him about this? And a million different questions as any 10-year-old is going to have at that point in time. And I wanted to know about this card and that card. And as soon as I said card, I think his eyes glazed over. He was like, okay.
I love your dad. He's been a great friend, but he did not prepare me other than I didn't need to be prepared to talk about cards. The business of publishing, I thought maybe some people want to know about that. No kid wanted to know about that. No collector wanted to know about it. They just wanted to know about cards. And I was really in the thick of it. And there were tons of card shops in Vancouver. And we already had relationships with them. And so it was easy to set up an afternoon tour. And that was a highlight for me. And the rage at that time was OPC Premier, hockey and baseball. And now they don't look very premier. I mean, the current set that I have in hand now, the cards are thicker, they're beautiful, they've got game used material, they've got on-card autographs. None of that was happening in 1991, yet they had the audacity to say this is a premier set. But people went for it. In fact, most of the kids on the tour with us were from America, some probably from other countries because it was a kind of a global thing, but mostly American. Canada was where those cards came, and so you couldn't get them in the U.S. as easily. So we got in there, and the kids were buying boxes and packs and cards. And
I still remember one of the kids who came from, I suspect, a pretty wealthy family. I think he bought like 3 cases because none of us had ever seen this O-Pee-Chee stuff. We had the basic Score and Tops and different brands, but you just didn't have the international exposure, and we didn't have eBay. We didn't have the internet to be able to see all these different things. Half the cards in the world I didn't know existed except for your magazine back in the day to be like, oh, this is a brand and that's a brand. Oh, okay. So you knew those.
In those days, still a lot more set collectors, and you could buy a box and get pretty close to a set of that. The problems the companies realize is, wait a minute, they're going to buy one box and then they're done. How are we going to get these multiple case buyers? And there was no grading at the time.
When did you start grading?
We started grading in 99, and PSA started about 92. So this was 91. Reagan, you were there. I was there. They were simpler days. We didn't think of it as junk wax.
We didn't know. Nobody knew.
The term didn't exist. But again, if there would have been junk wax, the O-Pee-Chee Premier would not have been junk. And now it probably is close to junk because they printed a lot more than we thought of it. But it was an upgrade. The production quality, the card stock, that wasn't super thick, but it was the nicest cards that O-Pee-Chee had ever produced. And frankly, they did it independent of Topps. Later, they connected with the Premier cards with baseball a few years later. But that was strictly O-Pee-Chee, maybe proving they can do cards on their own. Of course, shortly after that, they sold their license. Maybe they were having trouble with Topps. They stayed with Topps for a while. And then since 2007, Upper Deck owns the license. And so they pay royalties to the previous owners of O-Pee-Chee. But I noticed they're not using the O-Pee-Chee name, but they're using the sub-brand Premier, which I think had good brand equity back at the beginning. Again, it wasn't the reason I went on the trip, but it was the focal point of all these kids from all over the country and a few other countries. Kids are quick studies. They picked up pretty quickly. These were sharp kids that, hey, this is what people are chasing and we want some.
And it's different. That's always the key, at least in my world. It's what's different. You just had your episode about variations. Everybody wants something different. We call it base cards because they are base, right? Everybody has a certain card. Okay, great. But what's something different?
But you have an eye, Reagan, your photography and your custom cards and things like that. You're trained to see what's different. I won't say it's half and half, but there are two kinds of people. There's the herd that just wants what everybody else wants. Then there's people that say, hey, I haven't seen this. I'm interested in this because it is different. It's interesting to me. And so there's room for both. O-Pee-Chee Premier went from, hey, this is different, to, hey, this is everywhere. So it jumped the shark.
Amazing how it happens.
It jumped the shark. But now this new Upper Deck Premier, one box is one pack of 6 cards for $200 and some. Every card is a great card. Several are game used, a couple autographs. Even the base cards are serial numbered. Excellent card stock, great photography, all that stuff. And the word Premier still has brand recognition. So they're not playing Upper Deck. They're not even mentioning O-Pee-Chee. O-Pee-Chee was probably a popular price brand, was the Canadian Topps for the years when I was young.
And now it's getting a lot of recognition because of the latest Wayne Gretzky case debacle.
That is a debacle. That's unfortunate. But
it's got a lot of name recognition for it.
If you think something sold and maybe it didn't, and even then, is it going to get resold? That was a problematic case. It was legit. But if you break it up, the laws of economics are sometimes bent by collectors in that the sum of the parts could be way more than the whole, and it could be way less than the whole. Just depends on how it breaks.
That's the box of cards business in general. The whole box is typically worth a lot more than all the cards inside.
Unfortunately, yeah. And like you're saying, there are people that are mainly unopened collectors or box collectors or want to buy sight unseen, as opposed to not name it and claim it, but you see it and you think, hey, I like that card, I want to buy it, instead of, hey, that product sounds interesting, I wonder what I'll get.
Exactly.
But if we're going back to when you were a kid,
that was not how it was back then. Like you said, I still remember we used to buy complete sets.
Yeah.
That was a big thing. You would do that, and then you would also, as a kid, you would still be buying packs of cards, and I remember lining them all up and putting them in binders so that you knew exactly which ones you were still missing, and you'd go and try to trade for this one or that and try to complete the set, just because that's what we did back then. It doesn't seem like that's the case today.
OPC Premier, when it came out, baseball and hockey were both kind of short sets, I think 132 cards, and they were better players. So that was a trend in those days. I think they did some factory sets, which also is sometimes unwise if you want to promote future value, because it was easy to get the set if you just buy the factory set. Now you fast forward 35 years. Now nobody's thinking about Premier getting a complete set. You get 6 different cards from 6 different not subsets, but inserts and things like that. And the cards are beautiful in themselves. You might collect from your team and you might think that's a beautiful insert set, the game used. I want to get all of those. And maybe that's 20 or 30 of them. But that's how far the industry's come. So I just thought of you when I had that fond memory of OPC Premier, but Premier never fulfilled its promise as it perhaps is now. Upper Deck, because these are beautiful, outstanding cards and very expensive. And it wasn't a baby step, but it looked like a baby step in hindsight, but it really wasn't. The OPC Premier, like I say, was enough to get a bunch of not just impressionable kids, but sharp kids to jump in a van and go around the city panning for gold.
I'm trying to remember. That was right about when the chrome style, like the heavier stock started coming.
Those things were starting to come in. You get finest coming in and Upper Deck SP, it's like that. So the more foil, the more chromey, thicker cards. So my point is I have a fond memory of the Premier brand, and I'm glad that they're continuing it and they're taking it to new heights. And it's important in lots of things.
Oh, for sure. Brand recognition, brand connection. People still have memories of past years of when you've opened those. And I think there's a lot of guys that still open Top Series 1 because that's what you opened with your dad or that's what you opened as a kid. And is it the most collectible thing? No, but are there still some fun cards there? Yeah. And those cards are still at a reasonable price point. I still open a box of it every year with my son just because it's a lot of fun. And you never know who you're going to come across when you're opening it up.
Yeah, I think your dad's business at one time was licensing photos on a global scale. And that was interesting to hear his stories about that. But I'm just wondering, the licensing of OPC, I'm just walking through this with you, is that Upper Deck, every time they use OPC marks, they probably have to pay some percentage royalty to the previous owners of OPC for the license. And of course, they got to pay the Players Association and the teams and all that. But I'm wondering if they pay less if they don't use OPC, but just use the word Premier, because they acquired sub-brands, and it may be that they pay less. And I'm just wondering, in your dad's business, in our business, you're licensing, maybe it's less of a license if you're just pulling off that word. So I'm wondering if that saved them some money.
Probably did. They probably went into the negotiation on that and saying, look, here's the main brand will pay for this, and here's a sub-brand because it's a sub-brand will pay for this. And then at the end, they end up pulling out the OPC name and just use the sub-brand because it's more economical.
And it may be stronger. That's my point with you, because we're going back to 35 years ago. It was a splash. It wasn't just because it was OPC. OPC was meaningful because it meant Canada. We went to Vancouver. That was like panning for gold, going to the gold rush. That was the origin where these cards were, and you could, arbitrage them. You come up over the border. There were no tariffs back then. Walk across.
Not back then.
And bring it back.